Hello and welcome to Iowa News and Views. I'm Derek Maurer, sitting in as host for Joe Bolcom. Iowa News and Views is a half-hour program of news and public affairs. We like to focus on issues of community and statewide interest to people in Iowa. But every now and then we have the good fortune to meet someone whose work and activities take place in a national context. And so tonight we're very pleased and honored to have with us Winona Laduke. Ms. Laduke is an activist, a longtime environmental activist, and an advocate for Indigenous people's rights, and is visiting Iowa City now to speak at the University of Iowa. Winona, thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Winona, you were recently named as one of Ms. Magazine's Women of the Year. I want to congratulate you on that and begin our conversation with some of the activities that brought you to that spotlight in their magazine and their regard for influential people. And they were talking a lot about the fact that you've toured, I think, 3 times with the Indigo Girls in a project, I think, called the
Honor the Earth Tour.
The Honor the Earth Tour, yes. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
What I can tell you is that there are about 250 grassroots Native organizations across the country that are really on the front lines of a lot of these environmental struggles, but pretty much struggle in pretty close to total obscurity from the American public view. Whether it's the 100 different proposals to dump toxic waste in Indian communities, or communities like Point Hope in Alaska that has a big nuclear waste dump out there already, or these communities that are fighting for cleanup of their area, or opposing a strip mine, opposing logging. Those are areas that we've been working on. And I direct an organization called Honor the Earth, which every other year does a tour with the Indigo Girls, and between that also re-grants. We raise money. We've raised about $1 million over the past 5 years to put into frontline Native environmental efforts, because that's where a lot of work's going on. And the 2 things that those groups need is support from the broader community, which is part of what the tour does, and they also need financial resources to be able to wage their struggles with a little bit more assistance.
So as the tours are planned, you're thinking about what's going on around the country and the various struggles that are taking place in different states and localities. How do you begin working with the people who are working at the local level and tie them in with the
national tour? Well, all across Indian country, and I think across a lot of other communities, there's people that are asking some questions. And those are the questions that we address in the tour, we talk about. I mean, the questions we ask is, what we want to know about is how these big companies got rights that supersede ours. How it is that they got to be so that they don't have to clean up their mess. Why is it that we have to take responsibility for their mess or live with their mess? Our descendants have to live with their messes. And the other thing a lot of these communities want to say is no means no. This is pretty much the line, and you can't do it here. There are a lot of groups that are, as I said, working on these issues. And when we've, over the course of my work, I've worked for about 20 years on Native environmental issues. I've worked on trying to stop, and we successfully did stop a set of dams up in James Bay, Canada, known as James Bay 2, a huge set of dams that impact an area about the size of New England. We defeated it in 1994. There's a new set of proposals called James Bay 3, and now that we're opposing as well. Those dams flood huge areas of Cree and Inuit land and sell the power to America. And I think America needs to be held responsible for where we purchase our power from. Environmental impact statement should be required on any electrical import into this country. But each time we do these tours, we look at kind of the span of issues going on in the community, and we match that with the musicians' tour. So this year we did the East Coast of the United States. We did 21 shows in the fall, in September of 1997. We focused on grassroots environmental issues out there, launching the tour at a place called Akwesasne, which is a Mohawk reservation in upstate New York, where General Motors has a dump left from their powertrain facility, and they got PCBs in there, and it's been leaching into the St. Lawrence River and into this community for the past 15 years, and General Motors is really slack on their cleanup, and the Environmental Protection Agency pretty much just wrings their hands. They originally, PCBs is something you don't want. You don't want it around. And considered toxic waste at about 50 parts per million, and originally the Environmental Protection Agency had regulated that at 50 parts per million, PCBs had to be cleaned up. They recently, a couple of years ago, listed that site up to 500 parts per million, calling it a typical industrial site. And the shame of that is that these Mohawk people, we work with this woman named Gudgie Cook, who is a midwife. And what that community notices is that the breast milk of the women is contaminated with PCBs. And that the PCBs and these other persistent organic pollutants is what they're called, they cross the placenta and they get into the babies, so the fetal cord samples show these PCBs. So we wanted to draw attention to this dump and try to force the hand of the EPA to ask them to take care of their job, to do their job, to ask Carol Browner to clean up their mess. And so we generated about 5,000 postcards to Carol Browner asking her to do her job, not let GM off the hook. GM this year, last year as well, top of the U.S. Fortune 500 in sales. Not doing too bad, fourth in profits. Same thing in the world listing. And it seems like a company like that certainly has the resources to clean up their mess.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I read about the various campaigns around the country that you link into with this tour, it's very clear that what's coming up are issues of environmental justice and the growing realization that the majority society is dumping its most toxic and injurious wastes on communities that are vulnerable and marginalized and predominantly non-white.
I think that's true to an extent, but I think it's a broader issue than that. I think it's really, because I think that kind of almost ghettoizes it. The fact is that most women of childbearing age right now have enough PCBs in their body for their lifetime and to affect their children. It is an issue, of course, we are the most affected by it because we're the communities that are, heavily impacted. But you go out there and you do these shows with the Indigo Girls, and I'm looking in the audience at 4,000 young women who should be concerned about their reproduction. Mm-hmm. Not just, their reproductive rights, but about their ability to reproduce and the impact of the body burden they've got of toxins right now on their children. And so we're linking the Native community with the broader community, and saying we share the same set of issues, and we need to ask some questions. And we need to say no means no, and we need to say, you companies, you do not have a right to do this to us. Your rights should not supersede ours. They should not be superior to ours. We have a right to be able to breathe the air and to drink the water. And this is an organizing venue, the Honor the Earth shows, where we reach 100,000 people over the course of a month. At least, plus 1.7 million hits on our website. So, a lot of people look at the show and look at the issues, and that's what we're trying to do. That's kind of the course of my work, because I believe that the issues that we're talking about in the Native community are really fundamental issues of the future of this country. It's not about Native people, it's about how much power and privilege big corporations have in this society. Obviously affects our communities, because the government basically could care less about Indian people. But basically, from what I can see, one of the main bills we opposed in this tour is called the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1998. Passed the House and Senate. Senate Bill 104, House of Representatives Bill 1270. It's going to take the nuclear waste in this country from all the nuclear reactors, and it's going to put it on America's highways. and it's going to transfer the liability from private corporations to you and I. And those companies that pretty much made money hand over fist with all those federal subsidies they got for nuclear waste for the past 40 years, 75% of all research and development money in the Department of Energy, they're going to be able to wipe their hands of it. And we're going to be creating a public health hazard for moving waste across this country. They plan to move it to an Indian community. You know, Yucca Mountain is the main place they want to move that nuclear waste to. But as far as I can see, the 50 million Americans that happen to live next to the major interstates might have some concern of that waste.
Well, as you link up with and work with different communities around the country who are all involved in some local struggle, what are you finding to be the common elements of the ways in which they reach out to the broader community and the ways in which they engage the corporations that are dumping wastes, and just the common themes about local struggle?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if there's exactly a common theme. I would say that some communities are engaged in very focused battles with one corporation. You know, and that involves an entire array of tactics, whether it's intervention in the administrative process, whether it's, you know, lobbying up to the Environmental Protection Agency to tell the EPA to do its job, whether it's litigation, whether it's direct action. I would say that, you know, most of these Indian communities, to be really frank with you, the non-Indian community that is adjacent to them really could care less. You know, that is my observation. I live on a reservation in northern Minnesota, and the non-Indian community that joins my reservation looks down on us. You know, thinks about us probably about last. And when, in fact, you know, when we're talking about fish in northern Minnesota, we're talking about the fact that if you're Indian or you're white, you aren't going to be able to eat the fish in 20 years. You know, but because we're Indian people, a lot of those people don't, you know, notice it so much. So, you know, some of the outreach that these groups do ends up being broader, challenging the Big 10 environmental organizations to, you know, put some of their resources into the issue, and talking to shareholders about corporate responsibility. You know, that's one of the tactics that was used quite successfully in the James Bay campaign, which I consider to be an excellent tactic. Basically, stockholders should be held accountable for where their profits come from, and also should look at the economics of it. Because by and large, a lot of these projects are pork barrel projects, or I don't know what the term is, but they're huge capital investments that are often pretty risky. And the short-term liability is only shadowed by the immensity of the long-term liability of those projects. And so, you know, we ask churches and we ask different organizations. Students organize their universities for divestment, for instance, of stock in Hydro-Quebec, the big dam projects in Canada. And we're going to ask those universities again, and we're going to ask these people again to make sure that, you know, their tuition money isn't getting used to basically poison someone else's ecosystem or drown someone else's territory.
Mm-hmm. You're watching Iowa News and Views. I'm speaking with Winona Laduke. My name's Derek Maurer. I'm sitting in as host for Joe Bolcom this week. I want to remind you that Iowa News and Views is a regular news and public affairs show, a bona fide news interview show, and we have a website, and I hope they're going to see that on the screen. There it is. You can visit our website and find out more about the show, find out about our recent engagement with TCI of Central Iowa over their censorship, and how we resolved that issue. And we also have an email address. We're really interested in finding out what's going on with you and your community. And since we are in 15 different communities reaching on cable systems that reach 350,000 homes, we'd like to think that if you have concerns, you can let us know, and we can let more people know about it. And as Joe would say, don't touch that remote control. I don't want to have to tell Joe that people were flipping channels while he was away. So let's get back to our conversation with Winona Laduke, longtime environmental and Indigenous rights activist. Winona, you mentioned that you live on a reservation in northern Minnesota, where I think you are involved in the White Earth Land Recovery Project. Would you care to tell us what that
that's
is?
That's exactly right. You know, it's a funny thing. I mean, first, I just say, you know, referred to as a native rights or an environmental activist, and I really refer to myself more as a responsible parent. You know, as a mother of a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, I cannot really understand why I should be more concerned about how much sugar is in my son's breakfast cereal than I am about how much PCBs is in my son's tissue. I think that both of those are pretty fairly within the realm of responsible parenting. And so I don't consider myself so much as an activist as someone who just tries to do a responsible job with whatever, you know, skills I have, you know. The organization I work for primarily is, aside from Honor the Earth, I do 2 pieces of work. One is national, one is local. My local work is with an organization called the White Earth Land Recovery Project, as you said, which is a land, culture, and environment organization. 90% of the land within my reservation, which is in northwestern Minnesota, is held by non-Indians. That's because of a bunch of illegal transactions by the federal government. So the land within my 837,000 acre reservation is pretty much not held by us. Consequences of that to my community are devastating. 3/4 of all tribal members live off reservation, pretty much made refugees by this country. America has a policy of making refugees of people. That's pretty much what they started with Indians, and they continue all around the world from what I can see. Our community is the poorest people in the state of Minnesota. Every social and economic statistic, if, you know, to be high is bad or to be low is bad, that's where we are, you know. And all that relates to our history. So we're looking at the root causes of our poverty, and we've tried to get back our land through the courts, and pretty much got slapped in the face by the court system, which said that the statute of limitations had expired. Should have tried within 7 years of the original time of taking. So basically, having not done so, we ain't gonna get any justice. So my organization works to recover land through seeking return of public land holdings, which comprise about 1/3 of the reservation. Works to acquire land. We acquire about 1,300 acres of land on which, for instance, we run a 4,100 tap maple sugar bush. You guys have maple trees down here?
Oh yeah.
So we have big maple sugar bush, and we market that as a product called Native Harvest. We have a line of products which we market mostly to food co-ops and through the mail. It's called Native Harvest. And I spend a lot of time fighting things like clear cutting. One of the things I'm working on right now is I'm working on that the federal government's trying to delist the wolf off the endangered species list. I don't know if you followed this at all, but wolf is our relative, Anishinaabe people, really a central part of our ceremonial practice. And to take the wolf off the endangered species list to us, you know, is going to open up, make the wolf more vulnerable. They just returned kind of to some kind of vitality. And so right now they've had these hearings up in northern Minnesota, and assessment is that they're probably going to go all the way across the northern tier of the country and try to delist the wolf and open a season on them. That's what hunters want to do, and I'm opposing it. You know, our community is opposing it. So I do this piece of local work, which involves that, as well as a lot of cultural education and work with kids in school, litigation. So I am one of those organizations that we talk about in the Honor the Earth Tour. You know, there's about 250 grassroots, native, environmental, and cultural organizations. Something like my organization. Mine is a kind of large organization, but that's what we do. We're not the tribal government, although we work, you know, with tribal government when we can. And we're looking at things like alternative energy and alternative natural resource management policies, and you know, we kind of monkey along as best as we can.
Mm-hmm. You're also involved with something called the Seventh Generation Fund.
Actually, I'm no longer with the Seventh Generation Fund. The Honor the Earth Fund was a project of the Seventh Generation Fund, and we consolidated all that into one.
Okay.
So you don't have to ask me about all them. But
well,
yeah.
Good. That makes things easier then. Well, you've also written a book, a novel that's come out recently called Last Standing Woman.
The novel's about White Earth. It traces 7 generations of Anishinaabe families on our reservation, beginning around 1862 and ending in the year 2018. So it goes into the future. The book is about you know, different struggles on our reservation and about the people and how they I would say, you know, it's considered how the human spirit prevails over that period of time.
What, as you worked with the form of the novel, you're thinking about weaving reality in a different way, telling reality through a story.
Mm-hmm.
What's the reality?
Well, you know, there's the arena of native fiction writing. By and large, you know, it is expanding just geometrically. It's really beautiful what is happening in that arena. But a lot of it in the past has been historic. I was writing about historic eras in in our experience. And this book tries to move into the future. And that is what I wanted to do, is to take Indian people into the future, take my community into the future, because I think that we're, you know, always in the past, and I want to see us in the future that's, you know, written in futuristic novels like Dune or Brave New World. I mean, it's very bleak. Much of the future that's presented in the mainstream is very bleak. It's very mechanistic, very sterile, very dead, apocalyptic. And that is not the future that I foresee in our community. And so I wrote, you know, this other arena. So you know, the mix between truth and fiction is always very fluid in Native writing, because I find quite often truth is stranger than fiction. Truth is more interesting. So it's a mix of those things, and it is a way to tell our stories and to tell stories of people who, in some extent, do political work, but quite often just survive.
Mm-hmm. With the struggles that you know about, and you know about hundreds of them, how do you see that giving rise to this future of giving birth to a future that has some spirit in it, and that is not a dead zone, as you've described?
I believe, you know, that power is in your spirit. That's what I believe. I believe that American society defines power as money and brute force. You know, and that's not power. That's not power. That's money and brute force. That's two different things. I believe that power is in your spirit, and that the wellspring of much struggle is in your spirit, in your relationship to the earth, because that feeds your soul. That's what I believe. And I ultimately believe in the ability of natural power, and that power to continue. You know, a good friend of mine is Cecilia Rodriguez, who's the U.S. representative of the Zapatistas, and she was speaking at the Wounded Knee Memorial, the celebration of the liberation of Wounded Knee in 1973, this past winter, and she spoke to us, and she said, people ask how these Indian people in southern Mexico can hold off 2/3 of the Mexican army. You know, how can these people prevail against all those guns and all those tanks and all those armored personnel carriers? She says that people say they'll never win. She says, we'll win. She says, we'll win. May not win this year, may not win next year, may not win 10 years, but we will win, because we have retained our humanity, and they have forgotten theirs. And it is that power that is what gives me hope. That power, with the recognition of our relationship to that much broader base of natural power, that makes me see kind of that broader perspective. You know, this reality we know today is so short in the spectrum of time. It is so limited and mechanistic in its view. You know, believe me, I'm not dismissing the significance of persistent organic pollutants, you know, in the environment. I am fully aware of that. But I also know that you cannot make a society based on conquest and sustain it. You know, that is what America has done. Consequence of that, you know, extinction of more species in the past 150 years and since the Ice Age. Consequence of that, extinction of 2,000 nations of indigenous people. Cannot make a society on so much death, so much extinction, and sustain it. You know, that will not last. The only thing that lasts is that which is based on that natural power. And so that's what gives me my hope.
So when you speak of yourself as a responsible mother, you're talking about the true power. and that the political struggle that goes on is just a reflection of that inner power.
Mm-hmm. I believe that that is the foundation of that is the foundation of struggle. You know, that is the foundation of our struggle. You know, and I hope that other people find similar resonance in their work, because it makes it much easier if all your struggle is in your head. You know, you don't got that much power up there as compared to that much broader. You know, so that is, you know, that is the foundation, and that is how I know that things get better. You know, and I also know that when I go down that path in the future, you know, to see my ancestors, you know, I'd like to be able to hold my head up and say I tried. You know, that makes me feel a lot better than, you know, to say I just stayed around for 40, 50 years and wrung my hands. You know.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me.
You've been watching Iowa News and Views. I'm Derek Maurer, sitting in for Joe Bolcom. I'd like to thank all of our local sponsors around the state who help us get on public access channels in 15 different communities. Thank the people who, the individuals who contribute money to pay for the expenses of the show, and thank you for watching. Thank the crew for doing the crew thing, and thanks again to Winona Laduke for taking time out of her very busy schedule to be here with us and talk to Iowans. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.